Again, welcome and thank you for joining us today for this conversation. We're especially thankful to the Japan International Cooperation Agency, known as JICA. Japan's a great force of good in the world, and JICA is a great force of good in the world. And CSIS is really grateful and happy to partner with JICA. We love working with Japan and we love working with JICA. So thank you, JICA, and thank you for your partnership. This has been great to work with you on this project. I'm a great believer in the energy transformation, that there's going to be some kind of an energy transformation. And we know that we need that there's going to be a variety of disruptions and challenges. So there have been a variety of global shocks recently, like Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine has shown that the energy transition, we're going to have to rethink all sorts of energy assumptions because of this. We've seen that. And then, so we also need to think about our collective national security, and that energy is connected to our collective national security, meaning OECD countries, the Western Hemisphere, countries around the world. We need to think of energy as a national security issue. And so today we're going to talk about national security in the context of energy, including not just the United States and Japan, but Chile and Paraguay. What I think is interesting about hydrogen is its versatility. There's a range of industries that are currently using hydrogen. And with the right strategies, it's possible in the short to medium term that green hydrogen may be more competitive, desirable, and available. Among the world's regions, Latin America is uniquely positioned in theory, to become a leading green hydrogen producer, given its abundant natural resources. Both Chile and Paraguay have vast hydroelectric grids, and Chile possesses steady solar and wind energy necessary to power green hydrogen production. But launching a hydrogen market requires immediate investment, policy changes and actions, certain levels of additional human capital development and training, and it needs to work across sectors and in partnership on a number of different fronts. We've invited an excellent group of speakers today to help us think through Latin America's path forward in creating a robust green hydrogen market, and to explicitly explore Chile and Paraguay's prospects of becoming players in this space. So we're going to first have Mr. Gustavo Casal Bogarin, who will start with some opening remarks, followed by some panelist remarks, and then we'll begin the moderated discussion. But let me first introduce our speakers. So we're very honored to have Mr. Gustavo Casal Bogarin, who will provide welcoming remarks. Mr. Casal Bogarin is the Director of Alternative Energies at the Vice Ministry of Mines and Energy in Paraguay. Thank you so much, Mr. Bogarin, for being here today. We really appreciate it. And he's got more than 20 years of experience in the energy sector. He was a key participant in studies such as the green hydrogen route in Paraguay, analysis of technical and economic aspects for the development of a hydrogen economy in Uruguay and Paraguay, and has represented Paraguay in international organizations such as Mercosur and a number of energy organizations for the hemisphere. So welcome. I welcome you, Mr. Casal Bogarin. Let me turn the floor over to you and let you make some welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Buenos días a todos. Primeramente quisiera agradecer la invitación al programa CSIS por organizar este evento que consideramos de gran importancia. Les hago llegar los saludos del viceministro de Minas y Energía, el ingeniero Carlos Saldívar, que en este momento no pudo conectarse por
join us due to previous commitments. From the Vice Ministry in Paraguay, we are in control of the energy policies in the country. I would like to highlight three key points of what characterizes in Paraguay, so we can delve into other topics later on, which I am sure this conversation will be rather productive. I wanted to highlight that Paraguay is a great exporter of energy in the southern hemisphere. We export electric energy to our surrounding neighbors, and also biomass. That is what characterizes us, and all our electric energy is produced with renewable sources of energy. 100% is generated in hydroelectric plants. We have 3 plants, one with Brazil, Castreza with Argentina, and one that is our own called Acaray. And on the other hand, we depend 100% of oil products that are imported, which is one of the greatest challenges that we face in the country. And that is to diversify that utilization of the derivatives. We have made great strides on the development of biofuel. We have about 25% of ethanol mix, and in that sense, that's how we identify hydrogen as an energy vector for the decarbonization of the transportation sector in the country, which is the greatest CO2 source. And that's the challenge that we are facing. And like it was said, in Paraguay, we are on our way to developing green hydrogen, thanks to the IDB. And another very important study that gave very interesting results, which is the analysis of the technical and economic aspects to analyze the viability of hydrogen as a source of energy in Paraguay. Those are 2 studies that we have developed in Paraguay. We think that we have great perspective for hydrogen production, the creation of an internal hydrogen market, and to become a hub for the development of this industry. So, thank you very much for the invitation, and we hope to delve into some of these topics that I mentioned earlier. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Casal. Thank you.
El mensaje que usted recién dio. Excelente. Well, good. Thank you, Mr. Casal Bogarin. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Our first speaker is Mr. Manabu Sugioka. Sugioka-san is Senior Advisor of Geothermal Development at the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA. Mr. Sugioka has more than 10 years of experience as an energy expert at JICA and has worked in projects in Costa Rica, Bolivia, Philippines, and Ecuador. As a geophysicist, he has also carried out studies on the Ecuadorian prospects, helped in the design of the geothermal department, and worked in both the Chacana and he's worked on a number of other projects in the region. So I'm really happy to have Mr. Sugioka here to be with us. Our second speaker is Mr. Juan Carlos Jobet, Distinguished Visiting Fellow at Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy, and he's a former Minister of Energy and Mining for Chile. So Minister Jobet, we're very grateful that you're here. He led Chile's successful energy transition, including a thorough carbon neutrality plan for the energy sector, a phase-out plan for all coal-fired power plants, the accelerated deployment of solar and wind capacity, the development of key transmission infrastructure, Chile's first energy efficiency law, and an ambitious green hydrogen strategy to position Chile as a top global producer and exporter. It's really impressive. Thank you, Mr. Jobet, for being here. So let me start with you, Mr. Sugioka, to make some opening remarks, and then I'll turn to Minister Jobet.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all participants and the member of CERS and opening remarks from Mr. Gustavo. So using this as the opening remarks, let me explain very briefly, very quickly, what we understand. We, JICA, understand about the green hydrogen in this region. So first of all, these years, especially recent years, we JICA hear the word green hydrogen so many times from our partner countries, including in Latin America. And even in the geothermal sector, we heard many times the possible production of the hydrogen from using the geothermal, blah, blah, blah. And now we understand the biggest advantage of this region in Latin America, especially the South America, is the renewable energy resource, as most of we know, the highest potential of the solar and the wind. And so we can expect very high capacity factor using these resources. And some countries like Mr. Gustavo just mentioned, like Paraguay, already achieved almost 100% green power generation. So considering this high potentiality, we can understand the green hydrogen economy is highly expected in this region, Latin America, probably the price due to the price competitiveness. But green hydrogen is still something a bit new, and still there are some challenges. So first of all, we understand the kind of the biggest challenge is maybe the reduction of the green hydrogen production cost. This is a very remarkably identified as the biggest challenge in this region, because to utilize hydrogen to many sectors or replace existing use of the gray fossil fuel origin hydrogen, gray hydrogen, cost competitiveness is fundamental and the most critical point. In addition to that, some countries, or maybe most of the countries in this region, are aiming in future to be an exporter of the green hydrogens. Hydrogen could be the kind of the strategic new export commodity for these countries. That is our understanding. But for hydrogen exports, the price competitiveness might be more critical point, because in the global market, so many competitors, not only gray hydrogen, but also including blue hydrogen, which price is clearly lower than green one, even at this moment. So there are so many competitors in export markets. That's why the many efforts, including the multilateral cooperation, is focusing on to this point, we understand. And on the other hand, I would like to emphasize another point, important point. Taking a look at the global hydrogen situation, another challenge is maybe the still remained at the application user side, because most of us believe that hydrogen could be the clean fuel, future fuel for transport sector, replacement of the fossil fuel in industry, blah, blah, blah. But some countries, and also some countries already started the promotion of the hydrogen use, including our country, Japan. And a variety of subsidies were already provided to deploy hydrogen station, hydrogen value chain, promote hydrogen powered like fuel cell vehicle. And as a result, especially the last 2 years, we identified that even during the COVID situations, many countries started to promote the real use of the hydrogen, like in United States and Europe, including China. But I would like to emphasize the big challenge still remained in this point. Price of the hydrogen-powered product, it's still very expensive. It's still too much, not much competitive comparing with other traditional products. So that's why this situation might affect even Latin America, because even Latin American countries are aiming at hydrogen exporter in future. They need to start from the small domestic production, consumption, domestic project. So competitiveness of hydrogen-powered products also affects the feasibility of any project. The situation might be worse in case of the export project, because considering the difficulties to secure or to assure the off-takers. So these are what we understand in hydrogen economy. Big challenges exist both at the production side, but also at the application and user side. And that's why we need to watch out very carefully the global situation, progress of new hydrogen use technology, demand side to identify, to find out the real benefit of hydrogen to our partner countries in Latin America. So this is kind of the current consideration, current understanding of JICA. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. That's great. Let me hear from Minister Jobet now, please. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here and to talk about hydrogen. I want to just give a brief introduction, and then we can open it up for further discussion into more details. Mr. Suyoka, it's great to join this conversation with you. I was in Japan last year on discussions about hydrogen, and I think there's a big room for cooperation. And Mr. Casal Bogarin, I hope we can do more things in Latin America with other countries like Paraguay. But let me start by saying that for our country, green hydrogen is a big opportunity. It's a big opportunity to basically take advantage of the very abundant and very good quality natural resources we have to generate electricity. As you know, the most important cost component of hydrogen production is electricity. So the countries that have good natural resources to produce clean and cheap electricity are very well positioned to produce green hydrogen. In Chile, just to give you a sense, we have identified over 2,000 gigawatts of renewable capacity. That is over 80 times the size of our current power grid. So there's no way we will ever be able to take advantage of those resources using them locally. So hydrogen is the best way to produce electricity with those resources and then export that electricity through hydrogen and its derivatives to countries like Japan, for example, that need a lot of energy, but they will not be able to produce that clean energy locally. And those resources are very abundant, but also very good quality. So we have capacity factors in the Atacama Desert that can go over 35%. And in the south, in Patagonia, wind resources can reach capacity factors over 70% onshore. So that will allow us to produce very cheap electricity and therefore hydrogen and its derivatives. And also, because our country is a very narrow strip of land, we have over 4,000 kilometers of coastline and very open maritime routes to export those resources to the world. So the benefits of this industry could be huge. That's why we launched our National Green Hydrogen Strategy in 2020. So the basic benefits are to reduce our own carbon emissions when we use hydrogen in households for heating, in mining to replace the diesel that mining trucks burn, for example, in transportation, oil refineries, and so on. We think it will produce economic growth, create jobs, develop infrastructure. It will create an ecosystem of suppliers, potentially manufacturing capacities, and so on. It will diversify our economy and have indirect positive impacts on other industries like mining, as I mentioned. And at some point in the future, I hope it will be an important source of tax revenue. Now, as Mr. Suyoka said, there are still several challenges we need to overcome. And this is true for Chile and Paraguay, but for the hydrogen industry in the world. I mean, this is a global challenge in many cases. One, he mentioned is the cost of producing hydrogen. This is still very high. Basically because the cost of electrolyzers, which are the equipment that is required to break the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen, that cost is still very high. There are several producers, manufacturers that are developing technology to reduce that cost, but we're still not there. The second challenge I see is that how do we get 24/7 electricity available? In the case of hydro, you can have that, but in the case of solar and wind, you have intermittent electricity. So how do you get that stable supply of electricity to use your electrolyzers as many hours during the day as you can to reduce cost? How do you make sure that that clean electricity is additional electricity so that you're not displacing other uses? Because in that case, the green discussion is not that clear and so on. Then there's a challenge around infrastructure. If we're going to tackle the export market, it's not enough that we produce the hydrogen. We need to export that hydrogen to the world. So we need ports, transmission lines, pipelines, desalination plants to get the water and so on. Permitting in Chile, as in many other countries, is getting increasingly difficult, even for green projects. So permitting is another thing I believe we should talk about. And finally, I think logistics is very important. When we talk about hydrogen, it's important to understand that hydrogen has a very high energy density by kilogram. So 1 kilogram of hydrogen has a lot of energy, but 1 liter or 1 cubic meter of hydrogen has very low energy. So it has a very low energy density by volume. So there's a big challenge to move hydrogen around. You can move it around with pipelines in short distances, but to ship it is very difficult. There was a pilot project developed by Japan, actually, that is moving green hydrogen and liquefied hydrogen. But it has very difficult to overcome technical challenges. So what we will be doing, most likely for the next decade or so, is to move ammonia or liquid organic hydrogen carriers, which are combinations of hydrogen with nitrogen in one case or hydrogen with CO2 in other cases. So the challenge there, in the case especially of liquefied hydrogen carriers, is to find places where we have natural resources to produce electricity and also sources of CO2. And that is not necessarily that easy to find in Latin America. I think we need political stability to attract foreign direct investment. We need the acceptance and support from local communities. And I think regional cooperation could also play a role accelerating the development of this industry. And I think that countries like Japan and other countries like Germany, for example, they just launched the H2 Global facility to help developing countries produce green hydrogen. I think international cooperation will be very important to accelerate the development of this industry that has, as I said, enormous potential, but it still has several challenges that need to be overcome.
Great. Let me, we've had a chance to hear from each of the speakers. I want to ask a question for the three of you. We're seeing hydrogen development strategies emerge in different countries in Latin America. Chile was the first country to launch its strategy in 2022. There are other countries such as Colombia, Brazil, and Costa Rica that are also working on their strategies. Could you, any of you, talk about regional cooperation? It seems as if this is still at sort of working at a bilateral country stage. Maybe I'm missing something. I'd welcome thoughts about this.
Yeah, I can take that one and kick that off. So we launched our strategy in late 2020, so more than 2 years ago. And we were the first country, as you said. Right after that, we got calls from my partners, my colleagues in Colombia, in Uruguay, and other countries. From very early on, we saw that industry as an industry in which we need to cooperate. We don't see this as a competition among countries. It's called collaboration. We need to kind of overcome the challenges together. We help other countries in their own strategies to help them that they don't make the mistakes that we did early on, to learn from our lessons. So I think there has been some collaboration, but to be fully honest, I think Latin American energy markets could be more integrated than they are. So because we have natural resources that are very complementary, and I think if we had a more integrated region energy-wise, I think it would be a more efficient, more reliable, more affordable system. But I think there are geographical and political issues that get in the way, and sometimes political issues as well, in the sense that the political issues and the cycles of governments in different countries don't necessarily help build that integration, because the political cycles are too short and the efforts we need to overcome are long run. So multilateral organizations and international collaboration could help that integration by kind of giving continuity to the efforts to overcome that short political cycles that each country has. So I think there's more room for collaboration than as you said at the beginning.
Would others like to answer this question?
Si me permiten, creo que muy acertadas las palabras de Juan Carlos.
What Juan Carlos said is very true regarding the regional interest in collaborating. Paraguay is working with Uruguay mainly. And one of the studies that I mentioned was conducted with the cooperation of Uruguay and Germany. And I also wanted to mention other initiatives that we have at a regional level, because we studied other energy subjects. We're analyzing hydrogen, not only green hydrogen, but other types. And for example, the group Energy 9 of Mercosur, which is the initiative of each region, and Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina are members of this agreement. I think I mentioned Uruguay, Chile, and Bolivia are also associates. So in that regard, we're also exchanging a lot of information. We're organizing workshops to see what is that we can do with the development of hydrogen in these countries. And we also have an initiative that is called Sistema de Cooperación de Hidrógeno del Sur, and this is a new initiative. And we're talking about hydrogen in that initiative, and we also have other initiatives. But it's important to mention that taking advantage of this cooperation at a regional level is going to help a lot. And Juan Carlos mentioned a word that I love using, which is to complement each other. We have energy resources, plenty of them, but we have problems with climate change. So we need to collaborate to overcome and take advantage of our resources to have them available. Another issue that had been mentioned is the infrastructure. And with the river Paraguay that are next to Argentina and our other river next to Brazil. So there's a lot of room for exportation of green hydrogen. And also, when we talk about infrastructure, I wanted to talk about the project that we have with the Amazon route that goes from the north of Paraguay, and we're finishing to build a bridge that goes to the south of Brazil with the Jaco Paraguayo and goes all the way to Chile. So I think this infrastructure is going to help, and we're going to be able to use it in a few years to integrate each other. Thank you.
Mr. Sugioka, please.
Just one comment. I think both of them have already mentioned. Yeah, I also understand the importance of the regional cooperation, because, as I mentioned, the advantage of this region of Latin America is the rich in natural resources, energy resources. And this situation is not happening to the other regions, like in Asia and our country. So only the Latin America can have this kind of experience, and it's not necessary to repeat the experiences in the early stages in each country. It's better to share the real experience at the early stage. So I think that even technical aspect, but also the political regulation, establishment of regulation, many things can be shared in this region, I think. Thank you.
Well, I'm interested in how we generate domestic interest and domestic demand in hydrogen, given but we've talked a lot about the potential. So I'd be interested from Minister Jobet and from the gentleman from Paraguay and talking a little bit about how are we going to generate demand and interest for hydrogen? Because right now this is a potential, and there's strategies, but this is going to be something that we're going to have to educate a number of stakeholders on, I think.
Yeah. So, John, I think the first thing that I think it's important to understand. This is my view, but others might disagree. But I think the best way to accelerate the use of hydrogen, green hydrogen, is to start by replacing current uses of gray hydrogen or brown hydrogen with green hydrogen. So, for example, in Chile, we use, as in many other countries, hydrogen in oil refineries. So I think it's easier to replace that gray hydrogen with green hydrogen than try to use green hydrogen in vehicles, for example. That requires a lot of other things that you need to overcome. So in our strategy, what we are trying to push is the use of green hydrogen in oil refineries, for example. There are other applications that are using existing infrastructure, for example, to blend green hydrogen in natural gas grids. A small portion, you can use the same grid without, big changes in the infrastructure, without need to change the appliances. So there's one company running a pilot on that as well. The other big use of hydrogen today is fertilizers. So we could use green hydrogen to produce fertilizers. Now, there's another kind of bucket in which you can use hydrogen to replace fossil fuels in new uses. One example in Chile that is very important is mining trucks. So the copper mining industry is our biggest industry. They use a lot of diesel in their mining trucks. And one of the potential uses of green hydrogen locally is to replace that diesel in mining trucks with hydrogen. But there are technical challenges there. Some people believe that it could, battery electric vehicles could be a better option than hydrogen. It will depend on which type of operation you're talking about. But I agree with the basic premise behind your question, which is to use hydrogen or to develop local uses of hydrogen. It is a natural first step to develop local capabilities, technical expertise, to develop the local regulations and so on, to then build on those capabilities to scale up the industry and tackle the export markets. That is, by the way, how our strategy was developed or conceived. Tackle first local uses, then tackle the export market. In reality, though, those two things are happening kind of at the same time in parallel, but local uses will accelerate the deployment and the development of those critical capabilities for the industry. So I think that is very important to work on that as a first step.
Señor Casalvo Garín.
Sí, quería comentarles que cayó la traducción. No estoy
To
escuchando.
comment that I couldn't hear the interpretation. Something happened. Regarding the question, the great challenge mainly for Paraguay is the introduction of new technologies. As we saw before, what is our starting point to study hydrogen as an alternative? In Paraguay, the point of view was, or the perspective was, the contribution that it had on electric transportation. We have abundant electric energy. We are exporting about 50% of our production, and the energy policies helped us use our renewables better, and that way we compensated the energy matrix of consumption as the balance of the import of derived products, using electric energy more in the industrial sector, and as well as introducing that electromobility. When we did that, that's when hydrogen showed up as an energy vector, which would give us the opportunity to develop this whole issue of a new industry and completely new and disruptive energy in our country. As I said initially, that was the vision that we had in our country. And the intention was to create a market through 3 pilot projects, which were focused on transportation. When we conducted the studies, we realized that this could be a broader project, that we could use hydrogen as in the production of fertilizers in Paraguay, which is one of the greatest exporters of soy. We have great and abundant grain production. And we thought about the export of fertilizers stemming from the crisis in Europe. So that initial perspective or vision changed of the development of hydrogen in Paraguay. Besides that, we thought about the strategy of the production of ammonia and electrolyzers to be able to export within the region. On the other hand, I wanted to mention as well that the ANE, the National Organization Energy Issues, they did a study how to build hydrogen cells in the peak times, and Commerce Department analyzed the possibilities of production and industrial processes, and we have industries that use hydrogen in their processes, and also the substitution would be an interesting matter. From the Vice Ministry, what we're working on, like I said before, is on the creation of a legal framework, technical normatives, a breeding ground, basically. So this is how we believe that we can create the internal market for hydrogen utilization in the country. Thank you.
Great. Okay. There's a really great question in the chat from Takayoshi Tange. Thank you, Takayoshi Tange, for putting this out. That saying, here are some questions. Can production infrastructure be shared? And if so, how? Existent petrol industries in each country are good partners. Are they good partners or bad competitors for this? Is green hydrogen sellable? Are people going to lose jobs? Let me just start with those.
So maybe I can say something about infrastructure. So I think when you talk about production infrastructure, you need to break that into different pieces. So to produce green hydrogen, you need a lot of electricity. That infrastructure can be shared. So there are some projects that are getting clean electricity from the power grid with green, certificates to make sure it is really green. And in that sense, you can use this, electrons coming from the same generation capacity to produce hydrogen in different locations. So that could be considered as shared infrastructure. You also need transmission lines to move the electricity from where it is generated to electrolyzers. So that infrastructure can also be shared. And also, this is maybe not production, but then you need ports, you need desalination plants, and it makes a lot of sense to scale up those infrastructure and to share that infrastructure among different projects. So in the case of Magallanes, for example, in the southern Chile, in Patagonia, different project developers are talking about building shared infrastructure to minimize the cost and the impact on the environment and local communities, although it's also to make that infrastructure more efficient as you scale it up. So I think it makes a lot of sense to coordinate the efforts on developing infrastructure. And I think that is something that should be done by private companies themselves, but also in which the governments have a big role to play to generate coordinated efforts around infrastructure. And the second thing I want to mention is, will green hydrogen be sellable? I think that was the question then. I think, as Mrs. Suyoka said earlier, green hydrogen is still expensive. So it's, well, at least, fossil fuel prices, it's not that expensive. But if you think about, normal prices for fossil fuels, green hydrogen is still very expensive. I think it's going to be sellable, especially as the carbon price goes up and as the cost of electrolyzers go down. So I think it will be eventually be sellable and be competitive with the alternatives, but we're not there yet. And I think different governments are making efforts to reduce the cost of electrolyzers and the cost of production of green hydrogen. So one example is the Inflation Reduction Act that is giving big subsidies to the production of green hydrogen. And the bet there is to scale up production and to reduce the cost of production. Germany, as I said, just launched the first bidding process to basically give subsidies for green ammonia exporters into Europe. That will also help reduce the cost and the price of green hydrogen. So I think we're going to get there, but it's still expensive compared with the alternatives.
Great, thank you. Mr. Casal Bogarin.
Sí, gracias. Bueno, con relación a lo que sería
regarding the infrastructure. As you know, in Paraguay, this is in its beginning stages. We're creating capacity still. When we talk about generation, I mean, that offer is available. We have transmission networks. One of the main actors in Paraguay is the National Electricity Administration. We have made great strides in an initiative. The distributor in Paraguay is one called ANDE. It's a state corporation, and they already have a memorandum of understanding, an MOU with a company, a British company, which is the one that has made great strides, and they are going to build a production plant in March in Paraguay. It's what we talked about, the networks of electricity transmission, and it's available and it can be shared. Now, it's impossible for me to talk about the infrastructure of hydrogen production itself because of the issue of distribution or transportation of hydrogen. I'm able to answer one of the questions made regarding fuel importers or importers of derived products. One would be Petropar, which is an industry of Paraguay, which in a way regulates all the markets of derived products, and one is one of the main stakeholders in the development of fuels that are more environmentally friendly. We talked about creating a favorable environment, and in other countries we have implemented a bill that will be presented to the executive branch and to the president and later on to the Paraguayan parliament so they can study it, and incorporates incentives for the production of hydrogen in Paraguay. So that is the environment that we have in our country.
Thanks for being here, and I thank you again for your remarks earlier. You've heard several of the questions here. I'd like to bring you into this conversation, either react to some of the questions that have been put on the table, but I'm also interested, I mentioned earlier that we can't accomplish the movement to green hydrogen without partnerships. And I know Japan is interested in this. You've been working on this. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how is Japan working on green hydrogen in the Americas, and specifically how JICA is contributing to this conversation, given what you've heard. So either you could respond to some of the questions that I put on the table, but if you could also think about how is Japan and JICA playing a role in this, and how do you see Japan or JICA playing in the future or short to medium term in the conversation we've been having so far? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe replying to some questions also, I can reply, I can comment something. And actually, we JICA, not whole Japan, but at least we JICA, and now we are looking at what and how we can see about this green hydrogen economy in this Latin America. And at this moment, in terms of the very short period, we are providing through our training program, inviting our partner countries, even from the Latin America, to share the actual situation in Japan, some manufacture related with the hydrogen-powered equipment, and also the hydrogen value chain, and some demonstration projects, blah, 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 so that our partner countries can see the real situation of the hydrogen development in their countries, or I mean the future possible importers, so that they can understand the importer side, how they are trying to reduce the cost of the hydrogen use, as I mentioned in the first remarks. And so now we are looking at in this couple of years until the 2025 is a very important period, because most of our countries like United States and Europe, Japan, and China, and aiming we are establishing kind of the target, a particular number of the target in terms of the hydrogen in 2025. So these 3 years, we can identify the real situation of the hydrogen economy growth, and sharing this information with our partner countries. Maybe our partner countries, including Latin America, can adjust their strategy and the export perspective, something like that. So maybe replying to the one question about the positive or negative impact from the global warming, its answer is very easy. Ironically speaking, it's a positive impact, because of course, because hydrogen use is origin of the hydrogen use is from the decarbonizations. So if we are obligated to use to decarbonize more, maybe we focus on more effort to reduce the cost of the hydrogen use as well as the hydrogen product. So I can say again that in short term, maybe we can share the information, the global situation, both production and the input production and the consumer user side. And after that, maybe we can go on the next step to make a kind of the project real, actual, not pilot project, and real actual project, I think.
Mr. Sugioka, what do you think are the key? So I think we've talked about some of the determinants, and that we've got an ambitious timeline in the next 3 years and the next 8. What are the key determinants in your mind for success? What are the key determinants?
Yeah. Okay. This is maybe my very personal understanding. It could be maybe the real situation of the global warming. It can affect very much about the hydrogen growth. As I mentioned, the hydrogen strategy of the many countries is related very much with decarbonizations. So the global warming situation is getting worse more. People understand the importance of the alternative replacement of the fossil fuel very, very seriously. Because even though there are so many pilot projects, even in our countries, there are so many challenges about the cost reduction. The real use is very, very limited. That's why the key point is depending much on the real situation of the global warming and the kind of the establishment of obligation about that point, global obligation about that point, I think. This is very my personal comment.
But can I ask each of the other 2 panelists, if I said, what is the key determinants of success? Juan Carlos, could I go to you on this?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is price. That is the biggest challenge. I mean, how do we get price of green hydrogen, to be low enough to accelerate demand? And then, that's what's gonna set the ball rolling. So I think the capacity that governments have early on to support the development of this industry, to scale up production, and then reduce cost. I think that is the key. This is going to be the key determinant of this industry. I think that is starting to happen, but I think price is the biggest challenge, and I think the bottleneck there will be electrolyzers. I think the electricity generation capacity is there. I think electrolyzers. I mean, how do we reduce the cost of those electrolyzers? I think that is the most important thing we need to do, and that is technology, government support, and of course, I mean, private companies, innovation. But I think that is the biggest challenge we have.
Mr. Casal Garin?
Sí, sí,
Yes.
sí, complementando.
Yes, to add what Juan Carlos was saying, I think that is very critical, the definition of prices, to be able to lower that, and financing. I think that for our countries, financing for this type of projects would be key. And I think that as a government, as the state, we need to create those conditions, have clear regulations so investors feel safe. So I think that's key to be able to attract foreign investment from the private sector. So once our governments can really have those clear regulations and the companies can feel safe, they can be sure about financing. And I think that something that is important is to guarantee that energy production.
I'd like to give you each a chance for some parting thoughts about what you're optimistic about the future of green hydrogen in Latin America. Let me start with you, Mr. Sugioka. Are you optimistic about the future use of green hydrogen in Latin America?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm very neutral, not optimistic, not pessimistic, because as I mentioned, also, I mean, all of us know that the potentiality of the renewable energy in Latin America is very high. And geographically speaking, Latin America is located very near a very good location to export to maybe the nearest to the Europe or something, very high possible consumer of the green hydrogen in the future. So the chance is so much. So this is a very optimistic point. But maybe the pessimistic point is depending much on also the consumer, as I mentioned from the first. That point, still we are watching out very, very closely, and we are not 100% sure. That's why I can say that a bit neutral. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Casal Bogarin.
A ver, me gustaría ser un poco
I would like
más
to be more optimistic than Mr. Sujoka. We think that we have a lot of potential, and we had talked about that already, and we think that we can advance. Of course, we have a lot to do. We need to create that capability, not only infrastructure, but also other capabilities in human resources. In Paraguay, we don't have experts yet that specialize in this field, but we do think that we have the resources, and we want to think about having that sustainable production, including the social aspect, and that will give us an optimistic perspective, not only to keep moving at a short period, but in long term.
I'm reasonably optimistic, Dan, especially for a couple of reasons. First, because I think there are sectors of the global economy that we require some type of hydrogen or derivative of hydrogen to reduce emissions. There's clarity around that. I mean, electrification will be the backbone of the energy transition, but there's a missing link on that strategy, and there hydrogen will be very important. I think that's going to be replacing gray hydrogen in fertilizers. That's going to be green hydrogen. I think in certain sectors of transportation, most probably shipping and aviation, maybe some, land transportation, but most surely shipping and aviation, and also probably in cement and steel production. So I think the demand's going to be there. And if you look around the world and you look where are the best solar irradiance and wind and hydro resources in the world, Latin America is a natural candidate. So the demand will be there, the resources are here, and I think governments and private companies in the region must do their homework though. This is not going to happen automatically. There's a lot of work to do. I'm reasonably optimistic that that homework is being done, but this is not a 100 meters, sprint. This is a marathon. So we need to keep sustaining the efforts with consistent policy, business innovation. And I think these type of forums are very useful to try to foster those things to happen. So I appreciate that you organized this.
Well, we're really grateful to JICA for their partnership on this. We can't do these sorts of things without the support of our friends like JICA. Please keep an eye out. We have a report coming out next week looking at this very issue. So we really appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us today and being with us online. I want to again thank our friends at JICA. Thank you, Mr. Jobet. Thank you, Mr. Casal-Bogarin. Thank you, Mr. Sugioka. We really appreciate the time and effort. And so we're stay tuned and watch for our report that comes out next week. We'll end it here. Thank you so much.